The rain fell in sheets, cold and unrelenting, as Ezra Cain stood alone by his father's grave. He clutched a single white rose, its petals trembling in the wind, a fragile symbol of love that felt as futile as his presence here. His family's voices still echoed in his mind, sharp as the thunder overhead. "You're no son of mine. Get out." Just hours ago, the funeral had been a blur of black umbrellas and whispered condolences at St. Michael's Cemetery in Chicago. Ezra, 24, with his dark curls plastered to his forehead and his thrift store suit soaked through, had stood at the edge of the crowd, hoping for a moment to grieve. But his uncle's glare had found him first, followed by his mother's tearful hiss. "You brought this shame on us, Ezra. You and your sin." The word had cut deeper than the rain, slicing through years of silence about who he was. A gay man who dared to love openly, only to be cast out. He'd tried to speak, to explain that his love for Jamie, his boyfriend of 2 years, was no sin but a lifeline. But the words had died in his throat as his cousins shoved him toward the cemetery gate, their faces twisted with disgust. "Don't come back," his uncle had spat, and Ezra's mother, once his fiercest protector, had turned away, her silence louder than any scream. Now, alone under a gnarled oak, Ezra dropped the rose onto the muddy earth, his chest tight with grief, not just for his father, but for the family he'd lost in a single afternoon. The city's skyline loomed in the distance, a gray silhouette against the storm. Chicago, with its towering buildings and restless energy, had always felt like a place where Ezra could be himself. He'd grown up in its south side, in a modest brick house filled with laughter until his father's cancer diagnosis 2 years ago. Coming out to his family had been his last act of courage before his father's death, a desperate hope for acceptance. Instead, it had cost him everything. Jamie had wanted to come today, but Ezra had insisted he stay away. "This is my burden," he'd said, not wanting Jamie to see him broken. As the rain stung his face, Ezra sank to his knees, the mud seeping through his pants. He didn't notice the figure watching from a distance. A woman in her 60s, elegant in a tailored navy coat, her silver hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. Vivian Caldwell stood beneath her umbrella, her sharp green eyes fixed on Ezra. She'd come to the cemetery to visit her late husband's grave, a ritual she kept private, but something about the young man's solitude drew her in. His pain was palpable, radiating like the storm itself. Vivian was no stranger to loss. A tech millionaire who'd built a fortune in Silicon Valley before retiring to Chicago, she'd faced her own battles, first as a woman in a male-dominated industry, then as a mother whose son, Oliver, had been disowned by her own family for being gay decades ago. She'd fought to protect him, but Oliver's story had ended in tragedy, a wound she carried still. Watching Ezra, she saw a flicker of her son's defiance, his vulnerability. She stepped closer, her heels sinking into the grass. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice cutting through the rain. Ezra flinched, looking up to meet her gaze. Her face was kind but resolute, like someone who'd seen the world's cruelty and chosen to defy it. "You don't belong in this storm alone." Ezra wiped his eyes, embarrassed. "I'm fine," he lied, his voice hoarse. "Just saying goodbye." Vivian tilted her head, unconvinced. No one who's fine kneels in the mud at a cemetery. She offered her umbrella, shielding him from the rain. "What's your name?" "Ezra," he said, hesitant. He wasn't used to strangers caring, especially not ones who looked like they belonged in a penthouse, not a graveyard. "I'm Vivian, and I think you need a cup of coffee more than you need to drown out here." Her tone was gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. Ezra wanted to resist, to wallow in his misery, but something in her eyes, empathy, not pity, made him nod. They walked to a small diner across from the cemetery, its neon sign flickering in the gloom. Inside, the air smelled of grease and burnt coffee, a stark contrast to Vivian's polished demeanor. She ordered 2 coffees and a slice of pie, insisting Ezra eat something. As they sat in a cracked vinyl booth, Ezra found himself talking, first about the funeral, then about his family's rejection, and finally about Jamie. The words spilled out, raw and unfiltered, as if Vivian's quiet presence had unlocked a dam. "They think I'm a disgrace," he said, staring into his coffee. "My dad, he never knew. I thought I'd have time to tell him, to make him understand. But now he's gone, and his voice broke. They hate me for who I am." Vivian listened, her expression unreadable but warm. "Families can be cruel when they're scared," she said. "But their fear doesn't define you. Your love does." Ezra looked at her, surprised by the conviction in her voice. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," she said, her eyes distant for a moment. "I had a son once. He loved fiercely, like you, and he paid a price for it." She paused, then added, "You don't have to face this alone." The words lingered, heavy with promise. Ezra didn't know it yet, but this chance encounter would change everything, a spark of hope in a storm that had nearly drowned him. Ezra's apartment was a cramped studio in Pilsen, a vibrant Chicago neighborhood where murals splashed color across brick walls. The space was barely furnished. A mattress on the floor, a second-hand couch, and a wobbly table cluttered with art supplies. He was a graphic designer, freelancing to make ends meet, his sketches of cityscapes and abstract faces pinned to the walls. Jamie's presence filled the room, too. A photo of them laughing at Lake Michigan, his hoodie draped over a chair. But tonight, the apartment felt emptier than ever. Jamie was waiting when Ezra returned, his brown eyes wide with worry. "You're soaked," he said, pulling Ezra into a hug. "What happened? You didn't call." Ezra sank onto the couch, recounting the funeral, the rejection, and his strange encounter with Vivian. Jamie listened, his hand resting on Ezra's knee, grounding him. "This Vivian sounds intense," Jamie said, frowning. "You sure she's not just some rich lady looking for a project?" "She didn't feel like that," Ezra said, though doubt crept in. "She seemed real, like she got it." He didn't mention how Vivian's words about her son had stirred something in him, a flicker of connection he couldn't explain. The next morning, a sleek black envelope arrived under Ezra's door. Inside was a card with Vivian's name and a phone number, along with a note. "Call me when you're ready to rebuild. You're not alone." Ezra stared at it, torn between skepticism and curiosity. Jamie, peering over his shoulder, raised an eyebrow. "What's her deal? Nobody just helps like that." But Ezra couldn't shake the memory of Vivian's eyes, the way they'd held his pain without judgment. He called her, and within hours, they met at a sleek cafe in the Loop, its glass walls reflecting the city's hustle. Vivian arrived with a leather portfolio, her presence commanding yet warm. "I have a proposition," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "I run a foundation for young people who've been cast out for who they are. I want you to join us." Ezra blinked, caught off guard. "Join what exactly?" "The Caldwell Foundation," she said. "We provide scholarships, housing, mentorship, whatever's needed to help people like you thrive. I've seen your work online, Ezra. You're talented, but you're drowning, and I won't let that happen." He flushed, unsure whether to be flattered or wary. "Why me? You don't even know me." Vivian leaned forward, her voice low. "Because I see my son in you. Oliver was an artist, too. He was rejected by his family, and I couldn't save him. But I can help you." Her words carried a weight that silenced Ezra's doubts, if only for a moment. The Foundation's headquarters was a renovated warehouse in Wicker Park, filled with art studios, counseling rooms, and a community space buzzing with young people, many queer, many estranged from their families. Vivian introduced Ezra to Mia, a trans woman with a sharp wit who ran the art program, and Leo, a non-binary coder who'd built the Foundation's app. They welcomed Ezra with a warmth he hadn't felt since his family turned their backs. But not everyone was so kind. At his first foundation event, a fundraiser at a downtown hotel, Ezra overheard whispers from some of Vivian's wealthy donors. Another charity case, one man muttered, eyeing Ezra's faded jeans. Vivian's always picking up strays. The words stung, reigniting Ezra's fear that he was just a pity project. He slipped onto a balcony, the city lights blurring through unshed tears. Vivian found him there. "Don't let them define you," she said, her voice steady. "They don't see your strength." "I do." Ezra wanted to believe her, but the weight of his family's rejection still pressed against his chest. "What if I'm not enough?" he whispered. "What if I let you down too?" Vivian's hand rested on his shoulder. "You're enough, Ezra. You always have been." Ezra threw himself into the foundation's work, designing posters and logos for their outreach campaigns. His art became a lifeline, each stroke of his pen a rebellion against the voices that called him worthless. Mia became his closest ally, her laughter and blunt honesty pulling him out of his darker moments. "You're not just surviving, Ezra," she told him one night as they painted a mural in the warehouse. "You're building something new." But the past wasn't so easily left behind. One evening, as Ezra and Jamie walked through Millennium Park, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd, Ezra's cousin, Nate. His sneer was unmistakable. "Still parading your sin around." Nate spat, his voice loud enough to draw stares. Jamie stepped forward, fists clenched, but Ezra held him back. "Don't," Ezra whispered, his heart pounding. "He's not worth it." Nate laughed, cruel and cold. "You're a nobody, Ezra. Always will be." The words followed Ezra home, burrowing into his insecurities. That night, he lay awake beside Jamie, wondering if he'd ever escape the shadow of his family's hate. Vivian noticed the change in him at the next foundation meeting. "You're carrying something heavy," she said, pulling him aside. "Talk to me." Ezra hesitated, then told her about Nate, about the fear that he'd never be free of his family's judgment. Vivian's face softened, but her voice was fierce. "You're not defined by their cruelty, Ezra. You're defined by what you choose to create." Inspired, Ezra poured his pain into a new project, a graphic novel about a young queer man finding his place in a hostile world. He worked late into the nights, sketching panels of heartbreak and hope, weaving his own story into the pages. Jamie, ever supportive, read each draft, his feedback gentle but honest. "This is you," he said, kissing Ezra's forehead. "This is your truth." The foundation decided to showcase Ezra's work at their annual gala, a glittering event attended by Chicago's elite. Ezra was nervous, his palms sweaty as he stood beside his displayed artwork. The graphic novel's pages were projected on a massive screen, each panel raw and unflinching. The crowd was silent at first, then erupted in applause. Vivian beamed, her pride evident, but Ezra's eyes were on Jamie, whose smile said everything. Yet, the night wasn't without tension. One donor, a stern-faced man named Richard, cornered Ezra after the presentation. "This is bold," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "But it's a bit much, don't you think? Not everyone wants to see this kind of story." Ezra's stomach twisted, but before he could respond, Vivian stepped in. "Richard, art isn't here to make you comfortable," she said sharply. "It's here to make you think." Richard muttered an apology and slunk away, but the encounter left Ezra shaken. Was his story too much? Was he? Later, as the gala wound down, Vivian pulled Ezra aside. "You were incredible tonight," she said. "Your work is changing lives, whether people like Richard see it or not." Ezra nodded, but doubt lingered. He wanted to believe her, to believe in himself. But the ghosts of his past were never far away. The graphic novel, titled Uncast, became a quiet sensation. Local bookstores stocked it, and queer youth at the foundation shared dog-eared copies, their eyes bright with recognition. Ezra's story, of a boy named Eli navigating rejection and finding his voice, resonated deeply. Fan letters poured in, some from kids as young as 14, others from adults who'd carried their own pain for decades. Each one chipped away at Ezra's self-doubt, but the weight of his family's rejection still lingered. One afternoon, while sketching in the foundation studio, Ezra received a call that stopped his heart. It was his mother, her voice trembling. "Ezra, I saw your book," she said. "I didn't know I didn't understand." She paused, her breath shaky. "Can we talk?" Ezra's first instinct was to hang up, to protect himself from more pain. But something in her voice, regret, maybe, made him agree to meet. They chose a neutral spot, a quiet park in Hyde Park, far from the cemetery where everything had fallen apart. When he saw her, Ezra barely recognized the woman who'd raised him. Her face was lined with grief, her eyes red from crying. "I was wrong," she said, her voice breaking. "I let fear take over. I lost your father, and I thought I was losing you too." Ezra wanted to be angry, to scream at her for abandoning him. But all he felt was exhaustion. "You did lose me," he said quietly. "You chose to." She nodded, tears spilling. "I know, and I'll live with that forever. But I'm here now, Ezra, if you'll let me try." He didn't forgive her, not yet, but he agreed to keep talking. It was a fragile step, one he wasn't sure he'd take again. When he told Vivian, she listened without judgment. "Healing takes time," she said, "and it's okay to guard your heart." Meanwhile, Ezra's relationship with Jamie deepened. They moved into a small apartment together, a cozy space filled with books and art. Jamie, a barista with dreams of opening his own cafe, was Ezra's anchor, his laughter a reminder that love could be steady, not a storm. But Ezra's growing fame brought new pressures. Invitations to speak at events poured in, and with them came scrutiny. Online trolls called his work propaganda, and one anonymous message threatened to expose him. The words echoed his family's rejection, feeding his fear that he'd never truly belong. Vivian, ever vigilant, noticed his withdrawal. She invited him to her Lakeview penthouse, a sleek space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Over tea, she shared more about Oliver, how he'd been a painter, how he'd dreamed of a world that accepted him. "He didn't get his happy ending," she said, her voice thick. "But you can. Don't let fear win, Ezra." Her words stayed with him, a challenge to keep going. He threw himself into a new project, a mural for the Foundation's community center, depicting a vibrant tapestry of queer lives. Working alongside Mia and Leo, Ezra felt a sense of purpose he'd never known. But as the mural neared completion, a new thread emerged. Richard, the donor from the gala, was lobbying to cut the Foundation's funding, calling its mission divisive. Vivian fought back, but the battle was draining her. Ezra couldn't shake the guilt. Had his work caused this? Was he worth the fight? The mural's unveiling was set for a crisp autumn evening, the community center packed with supporters, artists, and youth from the Foundation. Ezra's artwork spanned an entire wall, a kaleidoscope of faces, hands clasped in solidarity, colors bursting like hope itself. As he stood before the crowd, his voice shook but grew stronger with each word. "This is for everyone who's been told they don't belong," he said. "You do. You always have." The applause was thunderous, but Ezra's eyes found Vivian's. She nodded, her smile radiant but tired. The fight with Richard had taken its toll, and rumors swirled that the Foundation's funding was at risk. Ezra couldn't let her carry the burden alone. After the event, he rallied Mia, Leo, and the other youth, organizing a grassroots campaign to save the Foundation. They flooded social media with stories of how the Foundation had changed their lives, using Ezra's art as a rallying cry. Uncast became a movement, trending across Chicago and beyond. The campaign worked. New donors stepped in, and Richard's influence crumbled. Vivian, reinvigorated, announced plans to expand the Foundation, opening a second location in Detroit. She asked Ezra to lead its art program, a role he accepted with a mix of pride and fear. "You're ready," she told him, her voice firm. "You've always been ready." Ezra's relationship with his mother slowly mended. They met weekly, sharing stories over coffee, rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. She came to the mural's unveiling, standing quietly at the back, her presence a tentative bridge to their past. Ezra didn't know if they'd ever fully heal, but he was willing to try. One night, as he and Jamie walked along the lakefront trail, the city's lights reflecting on the water, Ezra felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Jamie took his hand, their fingers intertwining. "I'm proud of you," Jamie said, his voice soft. "You didn't just survive. You built something beautiful." Ezra smiled, his heart full. "We built it," he corrected, pulling Jamie close. The storm that had once threatened to drown him was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. Vivian had seen his pain that rainy day in the cemetery, but it was Ezra who'd chosen to rise, to create, to love without fear. The mural stood as a testament to that choice, a beacon for others still finding their way. And as Ezra looked out at the lake, he knew he wasn't alone. He never had been.